Hey there, Marine. We know that as a Marine, intelligence is really the heart of everything you do.
Yeah, it's mission critical.
That's why we're diving deep today into MCDP 2.
The Marine Corps' core doctrine on intelligence.
It's really the foundation of how Marines think about and use intelligence.
At every level.
We're going to unpack some of the key ideas.
And hopefully show you how they apply in the real world.
You know, we're not Marines ourselves.
Right.
But we've spent a lot of time with MCDP 2.
Yeah, I really dug into it.
And we're excited to kind of share what we've learned.
One of the things that struck me about MCDP2 is its emphasis on the human element of intelligence.
Yeah, for sure. It's not just about, like, the data you collect.
Right.
It's about understanding your enemy, understanding their motivations.
Yeah, their culture, their decision-making process.
A much bigger picture.
MCDP2 even quotes Clausewitz,
Oh, yeah.
the famous military theorist. He said, "Many intelligence reports in war are contradictory, even more are false, and most are uncertain."
Okay, that's a little unnerving.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I guess it makes sense.
Right. You're dealing with an enemy.
Actively trying to deceive you.
Right. And then you've got the fog of war.
Yeah.
It's hard to get a clear picture. So MCDP2 is really about developing a critical mindset,
Yeah.
learning how to sift through all the noise, identify the signals that matter.
Yeah, like that example we were talking about, the 1973 Arab-Israeli War.
Oh, yeah.
The Israelis had a ton of intelligence about the Egyptian and Syrian forces.
Yeah.
But they just completely missed the warning signs, missed that an attack was coming.
They believed their own preconceptions, assumed the Arab armies weren't capable of launching a coordinated offensive.
And then, boom.
So they dismissed any intelligence that contradicted that belief.
A tough lesson.
In the importance of objectivity.
For sure.
That's why MCDP2 stresses challenging assumptions,
Okay.
being open to alternative perspective.
Yeah, like, just because you think something doesn't mean that's how it is.
Right. Good intelligence analysis requires intellectual humility.
I like that. Okay. So how does MCDP2 approach understanding the enemy?
It emphasizes that you need to view the enemy as a system,
Okay.
not just a collection of units.
So what does that mean? View the enemy as a system.
Think of it this way. An enemy army isn't just, a bunch of guys with guns.
Right.
They're part of a larger organization
Okay.
with their own goals, their own internal dynamics, strengths and weaknesses.
So to really understand them, you need to understand the system.
That drives their actions, yeah.
Okay. So, like, if you're analyzing an enemy attack,
Mhm.
you need to ask why they chose to attack at this particular time and place.
Right. What were they trying to achieve? What was their plan? How did their doctrine and organizational structure influence their decisions?
It's about going deeper, trying to understand the underlying
How did that
factors.
shape their behavior? Yeah.
Okay, so MCDP2 also talks about the difference between descriptive intelligence and estimative intelligence.
And it does.
What's the difference?
Descriptive intelligence is about what is and was.
Yeah.
The factual stuff. Where are enemy units? What equipment do they have? What's their order of battle?
So it's the building blocks of your intelligence picture.
Exactly. Estimative intelligence is more challenging.
This is about what might be.
Yes. Anticipating future actions.
Trying to figure out what they're going to do next.
Right.
That's got to be tough.
It is. You have to consider everything we've talked about. Enemy capabilities, doctrine, motivations, characteristics of the battle space, and, you have to be aware of your own biases.
Like we saw with the Arab-Israeli War.
Exactly. It's easy to fall into the trap of mirror imaging.
Assuming the enemy thinks the same way you do.
Right, which can be a fatal mistake.
Yeah.
So MCDP2 is about developing a mindset that's always questioning, always challenging assumptions, looking for new information. Because anything could change your assessment of the situation.
Always be ready to be wrong.
Yeah. And this leads to one of the most important points MCDP2 makes. Understanding enemy intentions is not always easy.
Because intentions, they exist in the enemy's mind. You can't just, see them.
That's right. You have to infer them from their actions, their statements, your understanding of their goals, and their cultural and societal values might be very different from ours.
Totally.
Take the Japanese Banzai charges and kamikaze attacks in World War II.
Oh, yeah.
From a Western perspective.
Totally irrational.
Right. But within the context of Japanese culture at the time, with its emphasis on honor and self-sacrifice.
In a certain kind of sense.
Exactly. To analyze enemy intentions, you have to try to see the world through their eyes.
Step outside your own cultural framework.
Try to understand their values, their beliefs, their motivations. which is a challenging but absolutely essential skill.
Okay, so MCDP2 also says understanding intentions is only half the equation. You also need to understand capabilities.
Yes. What can they actually do? What resources do they have? What are their strengths and weaknesses?
Because, I mean, they could want to launch a major offensive, but if they can't sustain it, their intention doesn't matter.
Precisely. It's the interplay between capabilities and intentions.
So capabilities are like the limits of what an enemy can do,
Right.
and intentions suggest what they might do.
Within those limits. And to understand those capabilities, you need good intelligence.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What does MCDP2 say about good intelligence?
It's more than just accurate information.
Yeah.
MCDP2 outlines 7 key characteristics: objective, thorough, accurate, timely, usable, relevant, and available. You could remember this with the acronym OTATURA.
Otatura. Okay, that's a mouthful. Let's break those down one by one, starting with objective. What does it mean for intelligence to be objective?
It means free from bias, personal bias, or distortion. You're not letting your own preconceived notions or your commander's desired outcomes color your analysis.
Okay, so like the Arab-Israeli war example.
Exactly. That's what happens when intelligence isn't objective.
Got it. So how do you make sure your analysis is objective?
You have to be aware of your own biases, seek out information that challenges your assumptions, and get multiple perspectives on the same piece of intelligence.
So talk to different people. Look at different information. Get a well-rounded view.
Exactly. Be willing to change your mind if the evidence, warrants it.
Next is thorough. What does that mean in the context of intelligence?
It means providing enough detail for commanders to make decisions. Not about knowing everything, but understanding what's known and unknown.
So you're painting a complete picture.
Even with gaps. And be upfront about those gaps. Commanders need to know what they don't know.
Okay, next is accurate. Seems pretty straightforward. Information needs to be correct, but I'm guessing there's more to it.
Yeah. A lot of intelligence deals with incomplete information. So you have to assess the reliability of your sources. How confident are you in the accuracy of the information?
So it's not just about being right or wrong.
No.
It's about understanding the level of certainty
Yes, and communicating that to the decision makers.
based on evaluating the sources and methods.
Right.
Okay. Let's move on to timeliness. Why is that so important?
Because things change so quickly. Intelligence that was accurate yesterday could be obsolete today.
So you have to get the information to the people who need it before it's too late.
Exactly.
Timeliness is going to vary based on the situation.
Of course.
A warning about an imminent attack needs to be delivered immediately.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. What about usability? What makes intelligence usable?
It has to be clear, concise, and easy to understand.
Yeah.
Remember, you're communicating complex information.
To busy people who are probably under a lot of stress.
Right. They don't have time to, wade through dense reports. They need to be able to use it
So you're helping them make sense of the information.
so they can make the best possible decisions.
Okay, 2 more to go. What about relevance?
It means that the intelligence is tailored to the needs of the commander at each level.
So like, not overwhelming a squad leader with
Mhm.
information that a battalion commander needs?
Right. Commanders at different levels have different responsibilities. A squad leader needs to know what's happening right around them. A battalion commander needs a broader view.
And a division commander needs to understand the strategic context.
Right, so the information needs to be tailored.
Okay, last one, availability. What does that mean?
It means the intelligence is accessible to the commanders when and where they need it.
So good systems and processes,
Yes, and a well-trained intelligence staff.
making sure it flows smoothly,
And anticipating needs, pushing information to them.
instead of waiting for them to ask.
Yes.
So those are the 7 characteristics of good intelligence: objective, thorough, accurate, timely, usable, relevant, and available.
So we've talked about the characteristics of good intelligence.
Right.
Now, MCDP2 also talks about this concept of,
Signals versus noise?
yes, signals versus noise, which is a real challenge in intelligence work
Yeah, it sounds like it.
because you're trying to pick out the important bits,
Signal.
right? The signals from all the distracting, irrelevant stuff, the noise.
Yeah, so how do you get better at filtering out all that noise and focusing on those signals that matter?
Well, MCDP2 talks about mindset.
Mindset.
Yeah, it refers to those assumptions, biases, preconceptions, things like that,
Oh, okay.
that we all kind of bring to the table when we're trying to make sense of things.
Okay, I can see how that could be a problem.
Yeah.
If you're already thinking, like, okay, the enemy's going to attack from this direction, you might miss signals that say otherwise.
Exactly. Our mindsets can be helpful because they help us filter information and make quick decisions, but they can also make us blind to information that doesn't fit our preconceptions.
So good intelligence analysis, it requires a certain level of, like, self-awareness.
Yes.
You need to know your own biases.
Know your own biases and constantly question your assumptions,
And be open to new information.
even if it contradicts your existing beliefs.
Right, which can be hard.
Yeah, MCDP 2 talks about the 1973 Arab-Israeli War.
Again,
Again, to illustrate this point.
because they were so sure, the Israelis, that the Arab armies weren't capable. They just dismissed the intelligence that suggested they were.
They filtered out the signals that didn't fit their mindset, and it cost them.
So how do you avoid that trap?
One important strategy is to actively seek out information that challenges your assumptions.
Okay.
Don't just talk to people who agree with you.
Get different perspective.
Yeah, talk to people with different views and be willing to consider the possibility that you might be wrong.
Be okay with being wrong.
Right.
Which is sometimes hard.
It can be, and another strategy is to be aware of those common cognitive biases.
Cognitive biases.
Yeah, they're like mental shortcuts that we use to simplify things,
Okay.
but they can often lead to errors in judgment.
Can you give me an example?
Sure, a common one is confirmation bias.
Confirmation
All
bias.
right, which is that tendency to look for or interpret information that confirms what we already believe.
We just like to be right,
Yeah, basically.
even when we're wrong.
Right, and another common one is availability heuristic.
Availability heuristic.
Yeah, it's that tendency to overestimate the likelihood of events that are easy to recall, to remember.
Oh, okay. So, like, if I just saw, footage of a terrorist attack on the news, I'm more likely to think that another attack's going to happen.
Even if, statistically, the risk is really low.
Right.
MCDP2 encourages Marines to develop strategies for mitigating these biases.
Like what kind of strategies?
Well, one is to use structured analytical techniques, which are designed to help you think more systematically, more objectively
Okay.
about the information.
So left gut feeling, more
Right, more data-driven.
data-driven.
Yeah, another is to get a second opinion from someone who hasn't been as involved.
Fresh eyes.
Yeah, fresh perspective can often see things that you missed.
That makes sense. Okay, so we talked about mindsets and cognitive biases.
Mm-hmm.
What else does MCDP2 say about separating signals from noise?
Well, it emphasizes the importance of understanding those different levels of intelligence.
Tactical, operational, strategic.
You got it. Tactical intelligence focuses on that immediate battlefield. It's providing information about enemy units, terrain, and weather to support decision-making at the tactical level.
So, like, if I'm a platoon commander, I need to know what's happening in my immediate area of operations.
Right. You need to know where the enemy is, what the terrain's like, what to expect. Operational intelligence takes a wider view,
Okay.
looking at enemy forces and operations within a specific theater of war.
So bigger picture.
Bigger picture, yeah. So if you're a division commander planning a major offensive, you need intelligence about the enemy's overall strength,
Okay.
logistical capabilities, their strategic goals,
Big picture.
big picture stuff. And then you have strategic intelligence, which is that highest level,
At the top.
the top, dealing with national and international factors that influence military planning.
So this is like political goals, economic stuff.
The economic situation, their relationships with other countries, all of that. Understanding the different levels of intelligence helps you filter out the noise and focus on the signals that are most relevant to your mission.
So like different lenses for looking at the battlefield.
That's a good way to think about it.
You've got your tactical lens to see what's right in front of you. Then you zoom out.
Zoom out to the operational layer.
Operational to see the bigger picture.
Photo picture, and then you zoom out even further
To the strategic.
to see that global context.
Okay.
And all three levels are interconnected.
Of course, a decision I make at the tactical level can affect things at the operational and strategic levels.
Exactly. And a strategic decision can completely reshape the battlefield at the tactical level.
It's a system.
It is. It's all a system.
Okay, so let's shift gears and talk about intelligence requirements.
Okay.
What are intelligence requirements?
Well, they're the questions that commanders need answered to make decisions.
Okay,
They identify those gaps in their knowledge about the enemy and the environment.
right. And MCDP2 specifically talks about priority intelligence requirements, or PIRs.
Yes, PIRs are those most critical questions for mission success.
So they help you focus on what really matters.
Exactly. They prevent you from getting bogged down in those irrelevant details. They keep you laser focused.
Okay, so like if I'm a company commander and I'm planning to attack an enemy position, my PIRs might be, What are the enemy's most likely avenues of approach? What are their defensive positions? What's the strength of their forces?
Those are great examples. You're focused on the information that's going to directly impact your ability to succeed.
Makes sense. And MCDP 2, it talks about using the example of the rescue of Captain Scott O'Grady from Bosnia back in 1995
Yeah, great example.
to illustrate the importance of clearly defined PIRs.
Yes, so Captain O'Grady was an F-16 pilot
Right.
shot down over Bosnia, and the commander of the Marine Expeditionary Unit, the MEU, that was tasked with rescuing him,
Yeah.
identified 3 key PIRs, determine O'Grady's location, assess the air defense threat, and identify any flight hazards.
So they could get him out safely.
Exactly. They needed to get him out, so they focused on the intelligence they absolutely needed to plan and execute that rescue mission.
So clearly defined PIRs, they help streamline the intelligence process,
They do?
prevent that information overload, and keep everyone on the same page working toward the same goal.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so we've identified our intelligence requirements, our PIRs. Now we need to figure out how to gather the information.
Right. That brings us to sources of intelligence.
What are some of the main sources that MCDP2 talks about?
Well, there are many different sources, each with strengths and weaknesses.
Okay, so let's walk through them. What about human intelligence?
Human intelligence, or humine, is collected from human sources.
Like people on the ground,
Right. Reconnaissance patrols, prisoner interrogations, reports from civilians.
talking to people, observing the enemy.
Exactly. Humine can be very valuable. It gives you insight into their intentions, morale, perceptions.
But it can also be risky.
It can. Human sources can be unreliable or even intentionally deceptive. Right.
So you have to vet your human sources carefully.
Makes sense. Okay, what about imagery intelligence?
Imagery intelligence, or IMBT, is collected from satellites, aircraft, drones, things like that.
So you're looking at pictures,
Pictures, yeah, and it can give you a lot of information about the enemy.
their locations, equipment, activities.
Exactly. You can track their movements, identify targets, assess damage.
You see what they're up to.
Right. IMT is often very reliable, but it can be limited by things like weather, terrain, and the enemy using camouflage.
They don't want to be seen.
No, they don't.
Okay, what about signals intelligence?
Signals intelligence, or SIGINT, is intercepting and analyzing enemy communications.
So listening in on their radio chatter.
Yeah, phone calls, electronic data, things like that.
Eavesdropping.
Basically, SIGINT can be really valuable. It can tell you a lot about their plans, intentions, their command structure.
How they operate.
Right. But it can also be technically challenging.
Especially if they're trying to hide their communications. Yeah, if they're using encryption, and you also have to remember that they can use deception.
To mislead you.
Exactly. So you can't always take what you hear at face value.
Got to double check everything.
You do. Now, another important source is open source intelligence, or OSINT.
OSINT? What's that?
OSINT is information from publicly available sources.
Publicly available, so like news reports.
News reports, social media, academic journals, government websites, anything you can find without needing to go undercover.
So it's kind of like doing your research.
It is. It can give you valuable background information about the enemy, their culture, history, their political system, economic situation.
Bye-bye.
You can track their propaganda, their disinformation campaigns, things like that.
So good intelligence analysts need to be good at finding and evaluating information.
From a wide range of sources.
Knowing what's real, what's fake.
Exactly. Separating fact from fiction, identifying propaganda and disinformation.
And putting it all together.
To create a coherent picture.
So it sounds like good intelligence comes from a variety of sources.
Absolutely. MCDP2 stresses that no single source is perfect.
Right.
Each one has its own strengths and weaknesses, so you need to use a variety of sources to get a complete and accurate picture.
And evaluate each source based on its track record.
Right. It's access to information and its potential biases.
Kind of like detective work.
It is. You're gathering evidence, evaluating its credibility, and piecing it all together.
Okay, so once you've gathered all this intelligence from these different sources, what do you do with it?
That's where the functions of intelligence come in.
Functions of intelligence.
Yeah. MCDP2 outlines 6 key functions that are essential for supporting commanders and achieving mission success.
Okay, let's go through them. What's the first one?
The first function is supporting the commander's estimate of the situation.
What does that mean?
It means providing the commander with an accurate picture of the enemy, the terrain, the weather, any factors that might affect the operation.
So like painting a picture for them.
Yes, you're giving them the foundational knowledge they need to develop their plan.
All right, what's the second function?
The second function is situation development, which is all about providing the commander with a continuous flow of information.
So as the operation unfolds, things change, the enemy adapts,
Right, you're constantly updating their understanding
giving them the latest information.
so they can make informed decisions.
Okay, the third function.
The third function is providing indications and warnings.
Indications and warning, what are those?
They're essentially early warning signs.
Okay.
They alert the commander to developments that could put the mission or their forces at risk.
So if you're monitoring enemy comms and you suddenly see a spike in activity,
That could indicate an attack is coming,
and you need to warn the commander.
so they can take action.
Okay, what's the fourth function?
The fourth function is force protection.
Force protection, that sounds pretty important.
It is. It involves all the measures taken to protect your own forces.
Okay.
From enemy actions, defensive operations, security measures, intelligence gathering, all of that.
So you're using intelligence to keep your own guys safe.
To anticipate and counter enemy threats.
Okay, and the fifth function?
The fifth function is supporting targeting.
Targeting.
Yeah, targeting is the process of selecting and prioritizing targets for attack.
Yep.
Intelligence supports this by providing information about potential targets, their locations, their weaknesses, their importance.
So you're helping the commander decide who to hit and how.
Exactly. That might mean identifying command centers, supply depots, weapons systems, things like that.
Taking out the things that matter most to the enemy.
Right. And the sixth and final function?
What's that?
That's supporting combat assessment.
Combat assessment.
Yes, combat assessment is determining the effects of your actions on the enemy.
So, like, did we hit the target?
Did you hit the target? Was it effective? How is the enemy reacting?
So you're figuring out if you need to adjust your plan.
Exactly. Combat assessment provides feedback that helps you improve for next time.
Okay, so those are the 6 functions of intelligence. Supporting the commander's estimate of the situation. Situation development, indications and warnings, force protection, supporting targeting, and combat assessment.
And these all show how vital intelligence is to everything.
Okay, so MCDP2 also talks about this tension between security and dissemination.
Yes.
What's that about?
Well, it's about balancing the need to protect intelligence from the enemy.
Keep it secret.
Right, keep it secret while also getting it to the people who need it.
So your own people can use it.
Exactly, and finding that right balance can be tricky.
Yeah, MCDP2 talks about the Allies breaking the German Enigma code in World War II.
Oh yeah, a great example.
They had all this intel, but they couldn't act on all of it.
Right. If they did, the Germans would have known their code was broken.
And changed it.
So they had to make tough decisions.
When to act, when to hold back.
Weigh the benefits against the risks.
It's a delicate balance.
It is, and MCDP2 emphasizes having clear guidelines for handling classified information, making sure everyone knows how to protect sensitive information.
Don't spill the beans.
Right, loose lips sink ships.
All right, so we've talked about good intelligence, the sources of intelligence, the functions of intelligence. Now let's talk about the intelligence cycle.
Okay.
What is that?
The intelligence cycle is a framework that describes the process of developing intelligence.
Okay.
It's got 6 phases: planning and direction, collection, processing and exploitation, production, dissemination, and utilization.
6 phases. That's a lot. Can you walk us through them?
Sure. The first phase, planning and direction, involves identifying what intelligence you need, prioritizing those requirements, and making a plan to collect it.
So this is where it all starts.
Yeah, it's figuring out what you need to know and how you're going to find out.
Okay, what's next?
Collection.
This is where you go and get the information.
Using all those sources we talked about earlier.
Human, I meant, signetosint.
You got it. And remember, collection isn't passive. You're actively seeking out what you need.
Okay, what's the third phase?
Processing and exploitation.
What's that?
This is where you take the raw data you collected and make it usable.
Okay.
Translate languages, decode messages, develop photos.
Making it understandable.
Right.
Okay, what's the fourth phase?
Production.
This is where you take that processed information and turn it into intelligence.
Yes, you analyze the information, you synthesize it, and draw conclusions about the enemy.
Okay.
Their capabilities, intentions, vulnerability.
Connecting the dots.
Exactly, creating that coherent picture.
All right, what's next?
Dissemination.
Getting that intelligence out to the people who need it.
Yes, getting the right information to the right people at the right time.
In a format they can actually use.
Right, clear and concise.
And the final phase.
Utilization.
This is where the commander takes the intelligence and makes decisions.
And takes action.
And the cycle continues.
It does. The commander's actions will generate new information, which feeds back into the cycle.
So it's always moving.
It's a dynamic process, constantly adapting.
And MCDP2 stresses that no one phase is more important than the others.
They're all important.
They all have to work together.
If one phase breaks down, the whole thing suffers.
Okay. Now, MCDP2 also includes a case study from the Vietnam War.
Yes, from 1972.
Can you tell me about that?
It's a really interesting example of how the intelligence process works in the real world and the challenges you face against a capable enemy.
What happened in 1972?
The North Vietnamese launched a big offensive.
Across South Vietnam.
Across South Vietnam, yeah, the Easter Offensive.
What did intelligence say before the offensive?
Well, at first they predicted it would be a quiet year. No major offensives expected.
Oh, so they were surprised.
Well, not entirely. Some analysts were starting to see warning signs.
Like what?
They noticed some strange language in captured documents and an unusual amount of movement, troops and supplies, into South Vietnam. Signals, but they were initially dismissed as noise.
How?
Some people thought they were just rebuilding their forces after previous losses.
But then as more information came in,
It became clear something big was happening.
something was up.
They started putting the pieces together.
Using humant, SIGINT, IMENT.
All of it. And they realized a major offensive was coming.
So they had to change their initial assessment.
The new assessment predicted the offensive. In the spring of 1972, it gave specifics about their capabilities, their objectives.
So they had some warning.
They did. They had a few weeks.
But the North Vietnamese still managed to surprise them in some places.
They did, particularly in the north.
So even with good intelligence,
There's always some uncertainty.
always.
The enemy can always adapt, and things happen that you just can't predict.
So the 1972 case study, it shows how important it is to constantly evaluate and be willing to change your mind.
You have to be flexible. Intelligence isn't static. It's constantly changing.
Always question your assumptions, look for new information,
And be willing to admit when you're wrong.
because everyone makes mistakes.
Yes, and sometimes the best analysts are the ones who can admit that.
Okay, so we've talked about the intelligence cycle, the sources of intelligence, the functions of intelligence, the importance of separating signals from noise.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. Now, let's talk about something called intelligence preparation of the battle space.
Or IPB.
IPB, what is that?
It's a systematic process that helps commanders understand the battlefield environment and how it might affect operations, both theirs and the enemy's.
So it's like thinking about the battlefield and how to use it.
Yeah, MCDP2 describes IPB as a four-step process.
Okay, let's break it down. What's the first step?
Defining the battlefield environment.
What does that mean?
It means identifying the physical characteristics of the battle space.
Terrain, weather, infrastructure.
Exactly. So if you're operating in the mountains, you need to understand how that terrain affects your ability to move, to communicate, to get supplies.
Okay.
And you also need to consider the human factors,
The local population.
the local population, the enemy's culture, their motivations.
So you're creating a picture of where you're going to be operating.
A complete picture, gathering as much information as you can.
Okay, what's the second step?
Describing the battlefield's effects.
What do you mean?
It means analyzing how those characteristics we just talked about, how they might affect both sides.
So you're not just describing the terrain, you're thinking about how it might help or hurt you.
And how it might help or hurt the enemy.
So if you're in a dense jungle, you might expect the enemy to use ambushes.
Hit-and-run tactics, yeah.
And they'd be good at camouflage.
Blending in.
So you need to adapt your tactics.
Exactly.
What's the third step?
Evaluating the threat
So this is where you take what you know about the enemy.
and apply it to this specific battlefield.
You think about their capabilities, doctrine, tactics, and how they might operate in this environment.
You're anticipating how they might fight,
Okay.
looking for their strengths and weaknesses.
So you're building a profile.
A profile of the enemy as they'll appear on this specific battlefield.
Okay. And the fourth and final step.
Determining threat courses of action.
So you're figuring out what the enemy might do.
Right, you develop a range of possibilities, considering their capabilities, their objectives, and how the battle space might affect them.
Trying to get inside their head.
Exactly, and anticipate their most likely and most dangerous actions.
So if I'm defending a key position, I need to think about all the ways the enemy might attack.
And plan for each of them.
So IPB is a really thorough way to think about the battlefield.
It's an important tool. It helps you plan and make decisions.
And MCDP2 points out that it's not a one-time thing.
Right. It's a continuous process.
Always ongoing.
As the situation changes, as you get new information, you have to keep reassessing.
Keep adapting.
And IPB gives you that framework.
And it's not just the intelligence officer's job.
It's everyone's job. The whole staff needs to be involved.
Operations, logistics,
If
communication.
everyone, it's a team effort.
So we've talked about understanding the enemy, analyzing the battle space, gathering information, assessing threats. But what about sharing this intelligence?
Right. MCDP2 emphasizes communication and collaboration.
Intelligence is a team sport.
It is. The intelligence officer needs to communicate with the commander and other staff members.
Share information.
Right. Work with other intelligence agencies and units.
Break down those barriers.
Absolutely. Everyone needs to be on the same page.
MCDP2 talks about lateral communication.
Sharing information horizontally across different units and agencies
So that everyone has the same understanding.
and can coordinate their efforts.
What about vertical communication?
That's important too, sharing information up and down the chain of command,
Keeping everyone informed.
from the top to the bottom and back again.
Okay, so we've covered a lot.
We have.
Good intelligence, the sources, the functions, the intelligence cycle, and now communication and collaboration.
So we've talked about how Marines approach intelligence and how they gather information and share it.
Right, a lot of moving pieces.
But MCDP2 doesn't just, stop there. It also gives you some tools to actually use that intelligence. Tools to help you think effectively. Okay, so it's like having a mental toolkit.
Yeah, exactly. MCDP2 provides a bunch of analytical techniques. Techniques to help you make sense of things, develop solid intelligence assessments.
That makes sense. So, what are some of the key techniques?
Well, one of the most important is deductive reasoning.
Deductive reasoning. That's the one where you start with a general idea and then use logic to reach a specific conclusion.
Exactly. Think Sherlock Holmes, piecing together clues.
Okay, yeah.
Like, let's say, the enemy wants to capture a certain town,
Right.
and then you see them moving troops and supplies in that direction.
Pretty safe to say they're probably going to attack that town.
Exactly. You're using what you know about their goals and what you see them doing to reach a conclusion about what they're planning.
Okay, so that's deductive reasoning. What about inductive reasoning?
Inductive reasoning is the opposite. You start with specific observations and use those to build a general theory.
So, like, if I see the enemy using the same tactic over and over...
Right, like setting ambushes on a specific road, I might figure that's just how they operate. Or that they're really worried about that road. You're using those specific events to understand their behavior overall.
Right. Now, there's also abductive reasoning. This one's about finding the simplest and most likely explanation for what you're seeing.
It's like picking the best explanation, even if you don't have all the proof.
Exactly. So imagine you discover the enemy has abandoned a key position.
Okay.
Abductive reasoning would have you think about why. Maybe they're retreating. Maybe they're planning a counterattack. Maybe they just ran out of supplies.
And you'd pick the explanation that makes the most sense based on what you know.
Right, given the situation and what you know about the enemy.
So these three types of reasoning are like the foundation for intelligence analysis.
They help you connect the dots, develop theories, make sense of all the information you're gathering.
Okay, so MCDP2 also talks about some more specialized techniques, right?
It does. One of those is pattern analysis, looking for those recurring trends in enemy behavior.
Okay, give me an example.
So let's say you're looking at enemy attacks over a few weeks.
Yeah.
And you notice they always attack right before dawn, and they always go after those supply convoys.
That's a pattern.
It is. And by recognizing it, you can start to predict what they'll do next.
And maybe change things up to throw them off.
Exactly. Change the convoy schedule, beef up security on those routes. Pattern analysis helps you stay ahead of them.
Okay, what other techniques are there?
Well, there's trend analysis, which is about looking for changes in enemy behavior.
So if they were using one type of weapon and now they've switched to another.
Right. Maybe that means they're running low on supplies, or maybe they've got new stuff from somewhere else. Trend analysis helps you understand how they're adapting.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then you've got correlation of events. That's about connecting things that might seem unrelated at first.
Okay, I'm not sure I follow.
So let's say you notice they're broadcasting more propaganda about a specific topic.
Right.
And at the same time, you see a bunch of their troops moving toward a certain area.
Maybe they're planning to attack that area, and the propaganda is to cover it up.
It could be. Correlation of events helps you see those hidden motivations, get a deeper understanding of what they're doing.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
Now, on top of all these techniques, MCDP2 also stresses visualization, actually using visuals to help with your analysis.
Okay, so what do you mean by visualization?
Using maps, charts, diagrams, timelines, all that. It helps make complex information easier to digest, easier to see what's going on.
So instead of just reading a report, I can actually see it laid out.
Exactly. It's like creating a map of the battlefield in your mind, seeing where the enemy is, where they're going, and the important terrain features. It can help you spot things you might miss otherwise.
Okay, so we've got reasoning techniques, pattern and trend analysis, and visualization. What else?
Well, MCDP2 also talks about using different analytical tools to help you,
Like what?
like wargaming, for example.
Oh, yeah, wargaming.
It lets you play out different scenarios, figure out what the enemy might do, and test out your own plans.
And simulations. You can model complex systems like the enemy's supply lines or their command structure, see how they react to different things.
Exactly. And statistical analysis. That can help you spot trends and patterns in large data sets.
So it's not just gut feeling anymore.
Right. You're using data and specific tools to back up your conclusions.
Makes sense.
MCDP2 stresses that intelligence analysis should be as, scientific as possible.
But it also acknowledges that intelligence is never perfect, right?
Yeah, it's never perfect.
There's always uncertainty, the enemy's trying to mislead you, and war is just unpredictable by nature.
It is. So it's important to be honest about what you don't know, how confident you are in your conclusions, and be ready to change your mind if you get new information.
Don't be afraid to be wrong.
Right. The best intelligence analysts are the ones who can say, hey, I was wrong about that.
Well, this has been a pretty amazing look at MCDP2.
It really covers everything.
Understanding the enemy, good intelligence, how to prepare for a battle space.
Sources of intelligence, the functions of intelligence, the intelligence cycle, and how important it is to work together and communicate effectively, and then all the analytical techniques that Marines can use. It's a lot to process.
It is, but it's been fascinating. And hopefully it's given our listener, the Marine out there listening, a better understanding of MCDP2 and how vital intelligence is to what they do.
The ultimate goal of intelligence is to support the commander and help the mission succeed.
And MCDP2 gives them the framework to do that.
It does, but it's up to each individual Marine to take those principles and apply them to their own situations.
So to all the Marines out there listening, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep working to be the best intelligence professional you can be.
Because you can make a real difference out there.
Well, that's all the time we have for our deep dive into MCDP2. We'll get you next time on The Deep Dive.